Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Bob Ritchie. Bob, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, man, we've known each other, I guess you'd say, via LinkedIn for quite some time, several years. We've talked about all kinds of things of cyber tech, national security, you name it. But for folks that don't know Bob Ritchie, don't know SAIC, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the team?
Sure. Hey, so I'm the Chief Technology Officer at SAC. Been at SAC off and on. And I say off and on. I'll explain that a little bit in a sec. But for about 20 years, um, by trade, a polyglot software engineer, developer, full stack engineer, full stack developer. Got into agile delivery in the early part of my career, mostly in the DoD command and control space and really undersea warfare space, and then just kept, stayed curious, learned as much as I could, as fast as I could, and really found a passion in sharing what I learned with others. And that's it allowed me or afforded me a really fun career across all federal government space, and then a little bit of a stint where I was a part-time employee of SAC while full-time at Capital One, helping the retail and direct tech in the mid-2010s move out of data centers and into the cloud.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. When you said that, I'm like, what does he mean? And I'm like, and now I remember. I remember seeing you in that stint for that time. And before we went live, like I was actually showing you, I've been reading this book, the SAIC Solution. It talks about like from the founder's perspective of SAIC and the evolution of the company, and just how he built everything that got built, organizationally. And I was going to ask you this. SAIC is quote unquote one of the bigs. You'll hear that term in the government contracting space. The other large government contractors like you all. What makes SAIC unique, and what's kind of kept you there? Like 20 years is a long time to be at one company, and they have an amazing portfolio that touches damn near every agency you can think of, every kind of mission. What's kept you there rather than leaving to another government contractor, leaving to the commercial side, that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So my origin story with SAC is kind of unique, or maybe unique, I don't know. But I started as an intern during the summer before my senior year of college, because my high school physics professor was one of the first 50 or so employees back in the mid 1970s. And so back then, like the founding roots of very, science first, technology first, they were all kind of, there were a large majority of them were nuclear physicists. And that was true of my high school physics teacher, Bernie Cotton. And we just stayed in contact. I was, a college basketball player at Virginia Tech, and so didn't really have much time for job fairs and resume building and all that stuff. But thankfully, just maintaining that contact with Bernie, he was able to get me an internship, and it was then a trial by fire. One of the things, and so I have, that's one piece of why I stay at SAC. It's personal and near and dear to my heart in terms of that connection. The other was during that internship, I got to be exposed to a lot of really interesting problem space. Both my parents are Marines. And so getting to work hands-on on undersea mine warfare as kind of the first tactical decision aid in the Geek Sim segment, implementing commander's estimate of the situation and commander's intent. And then my dad saying, hey, I was a part of the command that wrote that pub. There was a lot of unique kind of overlay there to feel like I'm giving back and serving, my country in exploring exactly what I, love to do, which was leverage software to build things quickly, get solutions in people's hands, and get that feedback. So that's kind of how I started out at SAC. Why I remain, the people there. So even interning, there was a gentleman named Joe Rosenthal that was my direct supervisor while I was interning there, and I ended the summer. He gave me the one of the most interesting compliments I ever had was, I think you learned how to think this summer, which could be viewed. He was a very particular individual and really an amazing mentor, but. It meant a lot, in terms of how do you think creatively, especially as we look at today's day and age where kind of the writing of the code is not necessarily paramount anymore with as many language interpreters and large language models that are out there, but really how to think about problem solving, how to think differently about what you could bring together. And then the people at SAC have really kind of stuck to that in my 20 years here of really being absolutely focused on mission outcomes. I make a joke sometimes we're really good at mission outcomes and maybe not always so good at business, because we would much rather see the mission succeed than maybe kind of maximize on profits. And I'm not an officer of SAIC or anything, so I'm not speaking for the officer, the inner circle, but absolutely it is super important to us to drive kind of purpose and mission over profits. And that's really what's kept me here. I had a brief stint, as I mentioned, over at Capital One, and it was awesome the pace and speed at which I had a great leader there in Gil House, who's now head of digital for JP Morgan Chase, and really just showed me a different way of leadership than I had even experienced at SAC before, in terms of being a hands-on leader, leading from the vanguard in the front, being on 2 or 3 in the morning, outage calls. As a managing vice president, Gil would be on those calls, and it kind of shaped how I led when I came back in terms of being hands-on. So while I am chief technology officer of SAIC, I think that term means a lot to a lot of different companies and a lot of different contexts. For me, it just means I have the right to participate and contribute to every mission across the company.
Yeah, you said a few things that have jumped out to me. First is like, I was in the military too, and I've stuck around the public sector since then, as a federal employee, as a contractor, working on the commercial side, just because like you do get that proximity to the mission. You feel there's a purpose to the work that you do. And I think that probably resonates with many people at SAIC, if I had to guess. And I was laughing when you said not the maximizing of profits, because I'm sure some of the organizations like, wait, what does he mean we're not maximizing profits? But when I started a government consulting company and contracting company myself, doing IT digital services type work focused on cyber, really quick, I realized I'm like, oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can do like all this work. And I realized there's a big difference between like being able to do the work versus getting to the work. Some companies in this ecosystem are incredible at getting to the work, but delivering the work, maybe not so much. And that's kind of like, I think, been something that is playing out in public right now with the organizations in this space, not to name anyone, but, we see it happening. And it's like, are outcomes being delivered? Is the mission being met versus, is there just money exchanging hands? And I think that's a good point to call out. And it's really cool. You got that stint in the commercial side too with Capital One, while still being able to come back and, go back to SAIC. And to be honest with you, it's really cool to hear the story of going from intern to CTO. Like, that's kind of, you've went, up the ladder, right? You've been at every level of the organization, it inside and out. And you don't hear stories like that too much anymore. Honestly, people, tend to jump around a lot and don't have those tenured stories. So it's always cool to hear stuff like that. And speaking about the, portfolio of work, like, I've bumped into SAIC in uniform, out of uniform, throughout my own career here. And I know you guys have a good presence on various programs when it comes to cloud, like, Cloud One, you have T-Cloud, various other big cloud implementations. When you look at the state of like multi-cloud in the federal and defense sectors, and we talked a little bit about this offline too, with the impact levels and stuff like that. Where do you see both, some things that are challenges currently when you look at the landscape, whether it's any particular program or agency, et cetera, or, as well as some opportunities?
Yeah, so I'll start with challenges, just because there was a bunch of popular memes going around about a Bezos quote about how leaders have a capacity to overestimate challenges and underestimate opportunities, or overestimate risks. So I'm going to be like a cliche leader and overestimate the challenges first. But I think some of the challenges continue to be economy of scale problems, or embracing cloud and multi-cloud and that nature as a business model shift as much of anything else, in terms of consuming what one or multiple hyperscalers can offer you, rather than maybe owning your own stack, or enjoying some of the autonomy that came with owning your own stack, but not understanding the kind of cost benefit analysis of giving up some of that autonomy and ownership to enjoy an economy of scale service and focus on your mission. So kind of centers around that. The other is parity. You mentioned impact levels. We continue to see a challenge in parity of service, where cutting edge technology is made available in the various hyperscalers, and you could see a direct impact of how it would benefit your mission. But you also have kind of the disheartening kind of head falling down of, well, that's going to be 6, 8, 12 months before it's at the impact level that my mission is operating at. And so we are seeing that pick up a little bit, and there's some innovative approaches out there on how to kind of leverage confidential computing and collapse some of the overhead management on the hyperscaler side to get to parity faster. Certainly the earlier leaders in cloud, like Amazon, that built out well before kind of Docker and kind of the container revolution really took hold. Although you could argue that, like with the OpenBSD jails and the Solaris zones, containers have been around a lot longer than Docker. But the other kind of newer comers, I'll say, like a Google Cloud, who's indexed almost entirely on Borg and Kubernetes as the way they orchestrate all their services, we're seeing an ability to move faster with parity, and then just take principled stances and saying, I'm going to prove to you that I can be secure in my commercial regions. It's, again, that's a cost benefit analysis that they made, right? They had a slow curve of adoption in DoD as a result, because getting to FedRAMP High took them a lot longer. Getting them to IL4 and 5 took them a lot longer. But then once they got there, you could see how this particular strategy would pay off if they could continue that snowball downhill. So that's the parity piece and the challenges. The other is, workforce, right? There are so many folks who spend a lot of their time and energy on operating securely in the cloud, whether that's moving to cloud or operating successfully in the cloud in a secure way. Getting that kind of expertise within any one cloud fabric is a 5 to 10 year journey, to the point where you've seen enough and you understand enough how to interpret signal the right way. That's starting to be counterbalanced a little bit, and this is going to dovetail into opportunity with a broader adoption of AI ops, a broader adoption of large language models being generically used for anomaly detection, pattern detection, which is a fascinating area of study as well. Of all the purpose-built models are kind of being outperformed by the latest frontier models, even though the purpose-built models were built specifically for those things. But that workforce challenge of how do I take advantage of the opportunities that a CSP may give me when my whole workforce only knows this other CSP, and there is some parity, but each cloud provider is different enough where you almost have to keep a decoder ring in your head to work, to move from Oracle Cloud to Google to Amazon to Microsoft, and that workforce challenge creates a compounding risk, right? Because if I have someone who's experienced and the hubris of experience in one cloud provider, and to think that translates over completely to another, I might be overlooking some of the underlying constraints. And that's true of any platform provider, I should say. If I thought I was secure on Pivotal Cloud Foundry and the way I built that way, and now I'm going to move to Kubernetes and the things I built can just translate right over, well, different trade-offs and assumptions might be in place and who's providing you that platform. And so there's back on the risk side, that is a challenge or a risk that organizations have to come to terms with. On the opportunity side, I think it presents, like I said, a almost a existential imperative to lean in to state-of-the-art technology to operate in that ecosystem. So how do you get to a place where I can have a AI assistant, not just in my development ecosystem or in my service desk, but from a site reliability engineering perspective, to not just have a pair, but a peer who's actually looking and interpreting signal and not replacing you, but augmenting your ability in context of what's happening, what signal it's seeing, how that's differed, and depending on the level of classification, it can maybe even see beyond your environment to say what's going on in the world and pull that together with solutions that Microsoft puts forward with Sentinel, right? The ability to see and log all endpoint logins globally and aggregate that data to have an informed kind of contextual feedback loop on what you might be seeing in your cloud environment is a really powerful tool. And the other opportunity in that space, specifically with cloud security, is the kind of cloud native application protection platform. So Wiz and Orca, and the things that put that in, I guess I should say Google Wiz. I don't know what terminology they've come up with there now, but Wiz and Orca that give you kind of that AI assisted but human consumable dashboard that's really tailored towards the security operations community. So I want to see things in context to critical vulnerabilities and known exploits. I want to see things in context to what's actually exposed on a known attack vector versus what's privately held, and who can move laterally to get at my crown jewels of data. Those are the contexts that difficult to keep, especially in a massive enterprise, to keep that context all in your head. So I'm really excited for the opportunity that kind of the state-of-the-art tools are presenting there.
Yeah, the last part of what you talked about there is something that really resonates with me, and I tried to write a piece about this from the cyber perspective. Is and this applies to the government especially too, and you'll see why I say that in a minute. Is like cyber's, if you look at like crossing the chasm, cyber's almost always like a late adopter and a laggard, because we're risk averse. Like we want to like see how things are going to work and like how can we secure it, what can go wrong, all those kind of things. And the government tends to be the same way. They tend to be very risk averse. Long sales cycles, longer technology refresh, life cycles, and so on. And I think when it comes to AI, there's some really real risk in not being an early adopter or innovator with AI. Both, on the technological front, like, just looking at cyber and IT in general, like you said, there's too much log data, too many systems, too many logins, especially in large federal IT and defense environments for a human to make sense of it all. They can't have expertise in Google, Azure, AWS, it all in one person. Like there's some, but it's very rare, right? And then trying to make all that information into one place is where CNAPs and things like that can come in, but also in the national security sense too, in my opinion. Like if we let other near peer adversaries or nations that, have competitive ambitions with us, like, be early adopters and innovators of this technology, it's going to be really hard to keep up and keep pace with them, especially given how quickly the technology is evolving. So we need to adopt it both from a technological perspective, cybersecurity, keeping up with vulnerabilities and cloud security and so on, but also, in my opinion, both on the economic and national security side of things too. And I really hope we learn from past mistakes of being a late adopter of cloud. And so other technological waves, like where we've kind of learned those lessons, like we relate to the game, and now we're kind of still working through the pain of being so late to the game in some ways. And you talked about identity and lateral movement and global logins and things like that. And we've, you inevitably, being the CTO and being at a large organization like SAIC, you've heard the phrase like identity is the new perimeter, right? You hear that all the time. But the perimeter, and I agree with it to some extent, but the perimeter is pretty porous and it's pretty problematic, especially in these large, complex federal environments where you have many IDPs, endless number of logins, devices, endpoints, cloud environments, you name it. When you look at the state of like identity security in the federal and defense sector right now, like, what do you see and where do you see it headed?
Yeah, great question. So porous is a great way to frame it, I guess, as just the present state, a somber look at ourselves in the mirror in terms of identity. And I'll say both in terms of federated ICAM across the board. There's a lot of parallel efforts going on, and it kind of gets back to that economy of scale challenge of multi-cloud is in a lot of cases, we compete with ourselves rather than collaborate together to get to a solution. When I say compete with ourselves, companies compete with each other, but then also departments within the government compete with each other. Even departments within the same department of the government compete with each other on the same kind of goal or mission. And there's an opportunity there to kind of coalesce and align. Especially the fact that private sector has done a good job in certain cases of getting to commercially viable solutions that can be secured. Especially in the pillar of identity, right? The challenge I see still, especially in the federal government space, is even once you've established identity, and so many of the existing applications were built and designed 20, 30 years ago before PKI was even a thing. Some of them don't even have usernames and passwords. It was just, hey, I'm on a Windows box that has a username and password, so that's good enough, right? And I'm going to put my application on there. And these are mission critical systems in many cases, right? So it's not like you could just say, oh, well, quarantine that off, don't let it on the network, because it's critical for defense of the homeland or defense of, even defensive cyber operations in some cases. And so there's this kind of bridge that needs to be, or adapter that needs to be in place in a lot of cases. And we've seen some really interesting paradigms emerge, right? Zscaler of the 2010s into 2020s was this kind of intelligent stateless proxy broker sort of pattern, right? Where you have something that lives close to your legacy infrastructure that might not be as identity aware, but then it phones home to this SaaS mothership that is identity aware, allows you to have kind of that central governance and enforcement without the need for private networks. And so you get kind of that SaaS-y type model that is really powerful, but then is also struggles for, well, I'm not ready to flatten the SIPRnet and the NIPRnet together. So how does that help me? Well, I got to field all of that commercial capability on the SIPR fabric. Oh, that's an expensive undertaking. Same thing up to JWICs, right? Very expensive undertaking. And so one of the places we've leaned in as a company is look at how private sector operational technology security has been solving the problem. And that's what led us to one of our portco companies, Zage, that does a kind of a distributed ledger for policy enforcement and policy decision points, which is fascinating because there's no mothership to phone home to. And so it's built for DDoS in that sense. And that as long as the nodes have a quorum locally, they're not only enforcing the policy, but you have the ability to update policy. But beyond there, because many of those kind of SCADA devices and other OT technologies and like oil and gas pipelines not only have no concept of identity, they're just a MAC address, right? They don't even typically know their IP. How do you provide identity-based security or role-based or attribute-based access controls on those devices? And that's something that solutions like Zage have solved. So we said, how can we take that solution, make it portable, and deploy it without kind of the overhead of like a Zscaler running on SIPR or JWICs fabric? And that's been really powerful in terms of bridging the gap, because you can put an identity aware proxy that's really thin in front of a legacy device that might not have as secure an identity, but then also you can put it in front of a legacy application and do kind of that same stateless identity aware reverse proxy, but enforcing a SAML or OIDC jot at that boundary before it ever gets back to the in-state application. The other kind of interesting thing about it is when you couple that with microsegmentation, you can present what feels like a single URL to the enterprise, but then actually give a bespoke identity-aware reverse proxy and get down to the level. So when you talk about AI adoption, we use that in some cases to do that identity-aware reverse proxy to give every single identity its own private LLM and its own private vector embeddings. And so what you upload there goes just to you and you only, and is completely segmented off from the rest of the enterprise. But I feel like I'm hitting an enterprise service without the overhead of kind of hosting a SaaS.
Yeah, it's funny you use the phrase pillar is a term you threw out when you were discussing like the identity aspect, and you covered a lot of great points there. And honestly, while you were talking, I was thinking like, you're not to kind of like feed your ego, but you really do represent a good C-suite technology executive, because you went through, business context of build versus buy and, disparate internal political fiefdoms of fighting for resources and duplicative projects. But you also went down in the weeds on like OIDC and JWT and like all these things about identity and so on. So I love to hear it, man. But, I was going to ask you, when you use the phrase pillar, I think immediately of like, zero trust, right? Like in the, federal, we had the Cybersecurity Executive Order 14028, the federal and DOT zero trust strategies came out. CISO put out a zero trust maturity model, and it has this data-centric security model aspect to it, which includes micro-segmentation, least permissive access control, you name it, some of these fundamental principles that you just talked about. When you look at the state of, federal and defense right now, when it comes to zero trust and this data-centric security model, like how do you see that, playing out so far, and where do you think it's headed as well?
Yeah, no, I think it's a critical unlock, and in the context of secure cloud, even I see secure cloud as a real enabler. Just like it's always been for Agile and DevSecOps, but back on to zero trust as well, because it gives you that ability to iterate quickly, get to enhance telemetry about your workloads in a way that we didn't necessarily have in data centers. We could. There are some exquisite implementations in data centers that were able to get to that level of ephemeral infrastructure and telemetry. And data-centric security, but cloud enables it in a way that we're able to kind of adopt it and enforce it without kind of, back to the business context, a really heavyweight centralized governance. So we get to kind of the federated governance of it. I see, as far as zero trust maturity journey across the federal government, identity pillar, to your point, it has been a big focus, and so there's been a lot of advancement made there. A couple of consistent patterns emerging, whether folks are choosing Okta, especially in the on-class world, that does a lot of not only the credentialing, but the identity provider, and now getting even more into privileged access management, and even security and account automation. So you starting to see Okta emerge as not necessarily needing a sell point, not needing a CyberArk, because they can handle it all in one platform. But at the same time, Ping's whole suite, Ping Identity, Directory, Federate, Automate. There's a couple of pings in the ecosystem to make the whole suite come to life, and that integrates really nicely with IPAM and account provisioning and accreditation as well. The data pillar has been really interesting, because you see RBAC and ABAC implementations that have varying degrees of granularity. And what I mean by that is a lot of folks have adopted attribute-based access control. So really predicating on the identity pillar, providing consistent attributes, which in and of itself is like, how many data model working groups do we need to come up with? What are the 10 or 15, or what are the core attributes and what are the extended attributes? But then you can start to influence, okay, I'm going to make my data access attribute aware. And where that implementation changes is, you have boundaries like an attribute is, what is your clearance level? So what type of data can you access? Well, the data is typically residing, just because of standard net-centric policies, on multiple networks and multiple environments. And so you still have this blend of net centricity, even with data-centric controls. Information domains has emerged as a really kind of fascinating in-between, and specifically at kind of the secret and secret releasable enclaves in DoD and in national security space. Everything, getting to a secret collateral baseline and a secret releasable baseline and establishing data-centric security of a macro information domain for something like Sabre allows you to create these dynamic communities of interest that are not actual physical things, but it's just clusters of labels. And if you're, it's making a real-time decision every time you're executing a transaction to say, hey, I'm a user, here are my attributes. It's a trusted signed, attestation, usually a SAML assertion. And it says I have secret clearance and I'm a bombardier. So those are the attributes that I have, and the data can make a real-time decision of, oh, okay, well, you can see this data. The granularity differences that we've seen is some implementations leverage multidimensional storage like Accumulo to get down to cell level based access control, which means I can see the whole record, but certain cells are going to be redacted, versus attribute-based access control on the rows, where the majority of the ecosystem we see kind of tends to the row-based, because that's generally okay. But when you have like exquisite decision advantage that you need, but you need to hide sources and methods, it can create a counterbalance. The other side is that granular cell level is what's needed to get to like that PL3 flattening of network storage. So instead of having to have replica databases at each enclave, which again, with cross-domain solutions, there's jitter in between, there's latency in between, both going low to high and high to low. Being able to flatten that is something we're seeing a lot of maturation on the DoD and IC side, getting to that kind of granular cell level data. Applications is the laggard, and I feel bad saying that as a software developer who started my career writing applications, building applications. But also, I mean, there may be a silver lining in that applications is the laggard, because the state of the art for applications, it's more existential. Why do applications exist? Applications exist to get the data from where it's stored to the person who needs to make a decision, or the non-person entity that needs to make a decision about that data. And that relationship with data is fundamentally changing over the last couple of years and moving forward. And so applications in and of themselves, I think, are going to be dramatically disrupted. Satya mentioned at Build last week that, putting SaaSes and ERPs on notice. And I think that's a fair point. I would say OpenAI and Claude Desktop are also kind of in that new genre of there's a new portal to the world, and it's not your traditional applications. It's an intimate relationship with the data that you should have access to. So there will still be a time where applications are bespoke and needed, but the cost benefit analysis, once again, if I can get the same access and same decision advantage from just an intimate relationship, a secured intimate relationship with my data through data-centric security and agentic kind of mesh of ecosystems, I see the applications lagging, becoming, oh, well, that's an easy write-down, write-off. I'm just going to stop investing there and just put all my eggs in this basket.
Yeah, I was laughing at the end of your statement there, because I felt like you're reading my mind with the next and probably last question I'll ask you here is, you talked about, these architectures where you get direct access to the data, the emergence of Claude, Cursor, you name it, these emerging new, AI native development tools and so on that let you, interface with data directly rather than having to go through applications. And I'm sure you're excited, if I had to guess, based on this conversation, we look at AI, Gen AI, LLMs, now the rise of agentic AI and the protocols like A2A, MCP, you name it. In the context of federal and defense community, like how do we, again, to needing to be an early adopter and innovator with the technology, use these technologies for things like SecOps and AppSec and, compliance automation, in the end case, the use cases are endless, but there's many of them. How do we do that while also, trying to keep awareness around the security of the increased attack surface and new attack vectors and things like that? I know it's a loaded question, but I'm just curious your perspective.
No, yeah. So I'm going to give you a bias from a software engineer's perspective, right? Because I see AI gets popped up a lot as something different than software, even though at the end of the day, what's executing is it's a type of software. So one, our kind of, I hate to even say it now, traditional software supply chain protections should be utilized to the maximum extent possible. So normal source code analysis, software lineage analysis of where this code is coming from is still at play. So you find these, even some of the frontier models, right? If the open source ones anyway, and you're like, wow, this part of the training was done on this fork of a library that 3 people maintain at some university. That's a risk that at least you need to be aware of. I'm not saying that it's a risk that you should say, I'm going to count out that frontier model, or I'm going to count out that, whatever model is being, it doesn't have to always be large language models, although they certainly eat up most of the airtime. But it's something that needs to be accounted for in the body of evidence of the software coming into your ecosystem, so that you can make risk-based decisions about, should I let that in, and what data should I be able to expose to that. So that's the software, the AI models getting into the ecosystem. The other is just the same kind of pattern of continuous security once it's in the ecosystem. So just like you would on a software application or an API that you're building, or a streaming data platform, you're going to also continuously monitor the solution in the wild. So I'm going to constantly reconcile the solution in the wild versus the latest updates of known vulnerabilities and exploits. I'm also going to continuously monitor, this is the kind of standard pattern of behavior of my ecosystem. Is there anything else weird going on? Like, is it all of a sudden phoning home to endpoints? So I'm monitoring my egress. Are there new MD5s showing up and executing in my call tables in the ecosystem that weren't part of my SBOM? Hey, that's weird. There's dynamically loaded libraries that are now all of a sudden being downloaded and executed on, that made its way into the environment. That's the type of kind of continuous security and execution that you needed for software anyway. That also starts to build the foundations of how you get to secure agentic mesh and secure interoperation and orchestration of many different types of models. What's fascinating about that, and I know you and I have a shared LinkedIn interest, although I don't know if you've met Christian, but I'm bragging. I met him at reInvent a couple of years ago, and he gave me a signed copy of his Istio in Action book. So, but I've been following him for a long time, from when he was at Red Hat in the early 2010s, and the work that they did on Istio from a service mesh standpoint, and then moving to ambient mesh, and really focusing on the ability to do waypoint proxies as a means of communication securely between Kubernetes workloads and even beyond, right? Because you can host IaaS now inside a pod, right? It creates a really interesting, I think, trajectory of adoption that you can just piggyback on that same service mesh and API gateway mesh capability to provide the same runtime security of, well, if I made that mesh aware of how the agents are supposed to behave based on their agent-to-agent specification, or how the MCP is supposed to operate based on its definition, I can continually monitor on those same waypoints, is it doing what it says it's supposed to do? I can continually penetration test against that way, against those models, to say, are the models starting to drift? Are they continuing to respond and defend the way I expect them to? Is the shape of the data changing where the models are now obsolete? So that the kind of model ops that's needed, it's a new pattern of telemetry that I'm really excited about. And the agent gateway and K-agent and K-gateway patterns coming in the open source world from Solo are really exciting.
Yeah, what I like about your answer is you kind of wedded the two. The one aspect is like the fundamental security practices of runtime security monitoring, software supply chain, traditional application security testing is still relevant, because it is all software at the end of the day for the most part. We talked about this with Rob Van Devere. I've had Rob Van Devere on from OWASP, who leads like AI security exchange over there, and he said like it's software. It's just software, But then again, you talked about some of the new attack vectors and things that need to be considered, whether it's the protocols like MCP or the models themselves, those kind of things. So while you were having this conversation with me, one question I did want to ask you as the last question here. Now you went through all the questions I've asked you. Is like, as a CTO, how do you? I'm always curious, like, how do you balance your focus, your attention, your learning on the business, context and the stuff that you need to have as a C-suite individual within a large organization like SIC, but able to also go really far down in the weeds, like you just demonstrated around, agentic AI protocols, cybersecurity. Like, I'm curious, what works for you? What do you find that's been effective?
Yeah, so I'll say one thing is I found throughout my career is understanding your own personal strengths and and also being okay at accepting what your weaknesses are, and then building your team to complement your weaknesses, right? So the team I have around me at SAC, and it's grown. Some of the folks I've worked with for the full 20 years I've been here. In fact, when I came back to SAC, my first direct report was my first boss when I was an intern at SAC. So it was one of those interesting things of just familiar teams and people who know each other's social norms and kind of the qualitative side can work and balance each other. The other is to kind of the same rules that apply to adopting AI. You can't just throw AI at terrible, messy data and expect results. Adopting those same disciplined foundations. So one of the things we worked really hard over the last 2 years at SAC is establishing a semantic ontology for the entire business. So what are modeling out what are the strategic motivations and drivers of all of our end customers, what opportunities and risks do those strategic motivations and drivers yield that we can help address, that we have intimacy with the mission, whether we were former operators or not. We have ideas about how we can help address those problems. And then where does technology help address that? Because it's not always a technology solution, right? It might be a process automation solution, or, hey, point them to another organization that solved a similar problem. By indexing on that, I mean, it's large, like 700-800 different customer needs is we use UAF internally to model it. So it's capability in the UAF parlance, but that really, capability is an overloaded term. So we indexed on customer needs. Was a real unlock for us to be able to manage at scale across a really diverse set of vertical go-to-markets with different clients and customers across all federal agencies, state and local, and even in some cases international, like coalition partners that all have very different strategic motivations and drivers. Allows us to at least have that kind of skeleton to hang information off of, and then allows me to say, like, okay, what are the ones that are the most mission critical to our national imperatives as prescribed by our CEO? So border of the future, citizen-facing services, all-domain warfighting, next-generation space, undersea dominance. What are the mission sets and strategic motivations where we as a company have committed publicly to those national imperatives, and we're going to go solve those problems with partners, with ventures, with maybe it's a COTS product that's available to the private ecosystem but needs to be hardened and brought into federal defense space, and it gives us kind of the Rosetta Stone to steer us to kind of translate business needs to technology in a way that reduces the cognitive load for me, and allows me to be my true ADHD self and just hop from cool tech to cool tech to cool tech, but not just leave it on the floor. So I would almost think of it as like an Intel analyst that's going from like all this context flying around, and there's only so much. I have a place where I can put it. I just, this is a cool thing. I'm going to hit pause on it. I'm going to hang it on the shelf right here. And then my team can see what I hung on the shelf because it's all open to the enterprise, and take it and expand it further. So when I come back to it the next time, I'm like, wow, I saw what I did, but wow, look what James did, or look what John did, or look what Tamika did. They've taken it to a whole nother level, and now it applies to further. So it's been a real cool thing. And I've become a believer in UAF modeling as a result of this, is moving beyond PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets and Word documents for conveying information. You still, even adopting AI, which that was another cool thing we launched this first quarter of this year, an internal kind of RAG-based agentic ecosystem on top of that semantic ontology. So it allows, like, when we hire someone new, they can chat with this to say, like, what's special about SAIC? And it can tell them, like, well, here's some proof points about something we've done before. Is that what you wanted to know? And you get kind of this more intimate relationship internal. So like you said, adopt the new technology, or you can really struggle to remain competitive. And last kind of related component of that is a former U.S. Navy captain, Tom DeVille, was he was Ron 1 back when he was in uniform, and then resource sponsor at the Pentagon before he came to SAC in the early 2000s. And while I was an intern, I had the opportunity to get exposed to a lot of those kind of more senior leaders. And his advice to me he gave me two pieces of advice. One, always try and work yourself out of a job. And two, when you look back in your career 10 years from now, make sure you had 10 years of experience, not 1 year of experience 10 times. And so that's kind of how I've been able to, I just took that to heart and execute that every day, try to automate the CTO function away. I am chatting with my boss, Lauren Knassenberger, last night about how soon is it till I can launch a CTO CTO agent within the company and then go do something new and interesting. We had varying opinions about how the proximity of when that's going to be reality, but it's really important, I think, for everyone to stay intellectually curious and intellectually thirsty, and then do like what you do on this podcast and just share openly with the broader community, right? The problems of this world are way too big for any one person, any one company, and the vendor ecosystem and the defense industrial base, the industrial base at large, even if you take the defense moniker off, there's an awesome opportunity for collaboration on delivering mission outcomes.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. Obviously, I think you probably know, but the comment about the same year of experience 10 times over, like, I hate that feeling of complacency where I'm not learning anything new, I'm not growing, I'm not being challenged. Because like you, I want to jump around, I want to read all the things, do all the things, and I just don't want to feel like I'm kind of stagnating. So I hate that feeling, and I think it's it's honestly a workforce parallel there. Because someone will say, "Well, I have 20 years of experience," and you look and like they've been doing the same thing for 20 years. I was like, "Well, have they really evolved and learned and grown? I don't know." So I think always being able to push yourself and challenge yourself is critical. And then you guys have such a robust portfolio of work across every single mission set you could think of, every agency. Being able to tap into that throughout your career, I think has served you well. And the last piece I'll say is it's really cool to hear you guys, not just adopting technology like AI for the customer and the mission and so on, but also internally to help people just do simple things like navigate the organization when you come into a large organization like SAIC. Because I've worked at some of these large organizations and it can be overwhelming. You show up and you're like, what the hell? Who do I talk to? Where's this at? Where's that at? Like, using this technology for that purpose is kind of cool too. And honestly, gets people up to speed quicker, delivering mission outcomes for the customer faster, which is what we're all after as well. So, man, I appreciate you coming on. We've kind of run the gamut of everything from zero trust, identity security, cloud security, agentic AI, you name it. So, Bob, I appreciate you jumping on. For folks that don't already follow Bob on LinkedIn, definitely give him a follow. He's always having great conversations on there, talking about the latest technological trends, federal defense, technology initiatives, and so on. And Bob, again, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Take care.